Welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Very exciting conversation today with actually I guess two of my good friends because both Jim and Vlad are currently on here. Excited to continue our standardization in automation conversation. We've got Jim on who will introduce, and he can reintroduce himself in just a minute. But we're going to really focus around data. We're going to talk to him about data models. We're literally going to talk to one of the experts who he and his team do this stuff all day, every day, and ask, are there values of standardization in data, and what do those look like? And I've got a fairly good idea that the answer to at least a couple of those questions are going to be yes. Before we kick off, we do want to thank Siemens for their continued sponsorship of this theme, helping to drive us in the direction of standardization, as well as the continued support of all of the community. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome everyone to Manufacturing Hub. We are episode 124. My name is Dave. This guy sitting below me on camera is Vlad. We've got a very special guest, Jim Gavigan, who is Chief Time Series Data aficionado and everything else over at Industrial Insight. One of the people I love to have conversations with. And honestly, Jim, so I was looking. This is your third time on the show. You were here on all the way back on episode 8. As well as episode 93. And I'm going to be honest, I spent like 20 minutes. I'm like, Jim had to have been in there somewhere. And then I'm remembering, I think I said something to the effect of, Jim, we promised to have you on again before the next 100 shows lapse. And so
you did it.
We did it, and we are always very happy to have you here. So Jim, thank you for being here. Welcome back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be back. And if anybody knows Dave, I got coffee. So I brought it because of Dave today. I usually don't drink coffee in the afternoon. And here's the thing. I think I gave you a hard time last time. I still think I'm behind Jordan Humphreys. I still think you've had him on more than me. Right?
I think Jordan has been on. I think
he's 3. So I'm catching him today. All right. That's good.
I think that there's a very small group. So you've been on 3 times. Bobby Cole, who was our guest last week, has been on 3 times. I think Jordan Humphreys has been on 3 times, giving us the, once or twice a year update on the recruiting side. Yeah. And I think Zach Stank has been on 3 times over the course of a variety of different shows, including a live show that we've had.
Elite company. I like it.
Yes, very, very elite company. As we were saying, as we were getting ready for the show, there are a few people, at least the 4 of you and a number of others included, who it's like, we could go have a conversation with you guys every week or every month, but then it would be, hey, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I'm Dave. This is Vlad, and here's one of our 5 guests that we round robin. But no, Jim, we're super happy to have you on. Could I ask you, if people have managed to miss your previous episodes, if you can give everyone just a bit of the highlights of a little bit more of who you are and what the team at Industrial Insight does?
Sure. So currently, I'll start at the current. What we do is we help industrial companies analyze their time series data. And actually, we get into other data other than time series. I mean, we're doing some stuff for people in, like, say, Power BI that's more their financial data. So, really, we like to consider ourselves, data experts. Time series data is our foray. But, we get asked to do other things, and the skills kind of align. My background, actually, though, is controls engineering. That's what I did for most of my career. Started out as a vibration analyst for like 3 months. That's a whole sordid story of how I got out of that. We'll have to do that on the show one day, tell that story. It does involve gunfire and being in the hood in Memphis, and I had to get out of that. But I got into controls engineering and cut my teeth on like Modicon PLCs and Siemens DC drives and Magnatech AC drives, and just got to see a lot of stuff in my first 6 or 7 years. And I worked for Rockwell Automation, actually in sales, and then I was a technical consultant for them. Worked for a large system integrator out of the Memphis area, headquartered out of the Memphis area. They got a bunch of locations now. They've really grown. And then I worked for OSI Soft for a few years before going back to that system integrator and then starting my own company with Industrial Insight. So, kind of came up, like I said, through the controls ranks, and I've always been kind of a data and stats nerd. And so it kind of fit like what I like to do. And I guess I've been in this field for like 10 years now. I think 2013 was when I got into it. Got into sales at OSI Soft. So, yeah.
someone who's, Jim, if you don't mind me asking, not as much familiar with OSI soft, could you maybe paint a better picture, like what I guess the transition and how they got to where they are today, also?
What about the Pi system and
Yeah, just
OSI
paint
stuff?
like exactly.
Yeah, so when I got there in 13, they were kind of in a little bit of a transition period, right? They'd always been known as an industrial data historian, right? So you hook this thing up and it collects data out of all your sensors, stores it in a database, lets you pull it back and do trending and, things of that nature, right? They're really trying to transition themselves into calling themselves a data infrastructure, right? Versus just a plant historian. And the way that they were kind of reframing everything was they had built this tool called Asset Framework, which allowed you to put all your tags in a hierarchical model, map them to actual English names of, instead of the P&ID tag naming convention that you were typically used to seeing in a data historian, allowed you to map it into English, build calculations, build events, do notifications, and then they got into some, web-based visualization outside of the old thick client of process book. And so, really it was kind of a natural fit for me to move into that space. When I was at LSI, we had done a bunch of work for a major manufacturer in a batch process, and Pi allowed us to solve a problem we had been fighting for a year and a half in like 7 business days.
Wow.
And just because we could see the data and we could understand, oh, these are the batches that are going over. Okay, well, what was going on in those? What's so unique about them? And we would go look at the trends and say, oh, we're hitting feed rates we had never hit before. And so we had some code in the PLC that, kind of started turning equipment off and slowing the feed down as you were hitting the end of the batch or the end of that first major ingredient. And it allowed us to kind of hit the target much more often. And so, literally they landed a new customer and we helped them build a new facility. And I was like, wow, this data thing just made 2 companies millions of dollars. And so that's really kind of how I guess I got started, was from that. And then when I got a phone call from a recruiter that said, hey, they need you to sell Pi in Tennessee and Arkansas, which is, I was in Memphis at the time. It was a pretty easy sell for me. I was like, yeah, I can evangelize that story because, I've used that software and done a lot with it, to actually help customers. Mm-hmm. And man, I can evangelize that story. So it's kind of where it came from. But does that help?
And I would say, the comment, the data, absolutely. And, that's kind of where I wanted to get to, because I think that there's a lot of conversations, and we've had them together with Dave around hardware, around software. And I think that those problems in general are understood, although there's some nuances. But I would say, like, on the data side, I think that although in our industry, there's still a lot of debates around which protocol to use, maybe which tool or software to use, I think pretty much we all agree that there is a need for more data in order to make business decisions, right? I think that
100%.
But there are a lot of challenges to getting that data from the plant floor. And I think that people have, or I guess enterprises have been trying for a number of years. There's obvious, I want to say, roadblocks or hurdles that they need to overcome. Could you paint us a picture of maybe what you're seeing in terms of, getting that data, and what kind of maybe conversations or challenges you're discussing maybe with your customers or in manufacturing in general when it comes to acquiring data, which I think is the problem in which we need more standardization?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be a lot more difficult when you didn't have as much networking, one, or like when I got into the business, if you had any PLCs networked to anything, it was Modbus Plus, like, because I grew up with Modicon, which was a proprietary protocol. I had to have a card that's stuck in my PCM slot, right? And it was like 1 megabaud. And, so you just didn't really have the infrastructure in place. Now almost every industrial company has all their PLCs networked on a standard protocol like Ethernet, or a standard, wire, essentially, right? And that helps a ton, right? Because that was a major problem, even 15 years ago, right? Even maybe even 10 years ago. But now, most things are networked relatively well, and with OPC and MQTT and, a few other protocols, I mean, you can pretty much connect to about anything. One of the things we always used to sell at OSI Soft was, well, we built over 450 interfaces. You need to get to a beta gauge in a paper mill, we probably have an interface for it. If you need to get to, some weird thing out on the plant floor, we probably wrote an interface for it, right? Well, now pretty much everything talks OPC, MQTT, or, DNP3, Modbus. There's something, relatively common that you can connect to it generally. So connectivity is not as big of an issue. Now it's really, what's the right platform, that I should use. Pi was actually very big in the heavy industries. Like we used to joke around, we're just chasing smokestacks, right? Because we're looking for power plants, paper mills, chemical plants, refineries. We had, kind of what we were looking for, right? But then you have these little food and beverage plants, these small like packaging plants. I was talking to a guy the other day who's going to work for Sunoco, and I called on a Sunoco plant that made tube stock for the Pringles cans for the for Pringles, right? They don't have the kind of money to like throw at maybe a pie system, right? Or it's harder to justify it, it's like, or the process itself like doesn't necessarily lend itself because like you're not measuring flows and pressures and temperatures and things like that. It's more how many widgets have I made, and it's super high speed, so the value of it is a little bit different. And, and then also you're like, well, I can't afford to spend $150,000 or more on a pie system. So that's been still a little bit of a challenge, but there's a lot of other like lower cost systems out there that are super functional that I think you almost don't have an excuse anymore. You should be able to get the data in something, like even if it's, you're an ignition customer and, you hook it up to their historian, which, is pretty limited. You can jump up from there into say Canary or somebody like that. It makes a super functional, but, super cost effective system, and then still the granddaddy is still Pi, right? There's been some others, around, like Aspen has IP21, but that's generally in where we see that one generally is in a chemical plant or a refinery or somewhere where they're using the other Aspen software, all the modeling and APC software that they have. They built some integration to that, so it makes more sense for them to just use it. But my goodness, you don't, and even, Rockwell has an offering, like they brand labeled Pi, many years ago, I think 2007, 2008, and I think they're still deploying that, and it's actually at a lower cost, than a full blown Pi system. So it's bundled different, but it's a couple years old, but because they had to put the factory talk services wrap around it. But there's almost no excuse anymore. You should be able to get data into something. So
let me ask you, I guess, a follow-up question again for those who are maybe considering a data aggregation system for their plant or looking at like different solutions. I've certainly had many conversations with engineering level personnel that is asked by their manager, hey, we would like to monitor a system, and maybe at the beginning it's something basic like let's receive email alerts when a certain pump goes down. But to bring us back to a question, maybe when you're talking of deploying a Pi system at the plant level, what does that typically entail, right? Is there a step where you need to audit what kind of instrumentation you have, then you tie into your PLCs, you have to deploy a local server, maybe a cloud-based server? Like, what does that look like in general?
Well, and it's changing. Like in the olden days, we would have, we would typically install the interface software because OSI software would sell you an interface, right? Typically that would go on the same machine that your OPC server's on, right? Because the interface is just a client to the OPC, right? Just like your HMI already was, right? And then that typically is down at the controls network, right? You typically would put the server, the Pi server components in a DMZ, right? So that you can kind of control traffic, right? One-way traffic out of the controls network into that. And then you would poke a couple holes in the firewall to the business network so that people could go retrieve data from the server, right? And you're right. Now it's, it gets a lot more complicated because it's like, well, I have this supplier who has this super specific domain expertise, and I need to share 5,000 of my 50,000 tags with them, but I need to do it securely. And I don't want them, I don't want to poke a bunch of holes in my firewall so that they can stream data. And so, now you are having to get what is a cloud-based solution that potentially I can share my data with another vendor who provides expertise to me. Right. And that's kind of a, a little bit of a challenge now. There's some ways certainly to get there. OSI Soft and now Aviva have worked on some ways to do that. Canary's got some ways to do that, but, and I'd say another company that I forgot to mention is the guys over at Data Park. They have come a long way as well, and they're making, a lot of headway in some plants beyond kind of where they've been. They've been traditionally in the pulp and paper industry, but they're showing up a lot of places, and they're good folks too. We know them as, quite well as well. So, when you've been in this kind of business this long and you do what we do, you kind of get to meet all the players. And, there's some good ones out there. There's literally like no excuse to not have something, but yeah, to your point, getting that data securely to say another vendor or a supplier is still a little tricky. Mm-hmm. So it can be done, but still requires some thought.
Dave, what are your thoughts?
I think this is really interesting. Jim, I want to follow up on a question that I feel we had to have asked you last time, right? Maybe a couple of years ago, OSI Soft sold and they became part of Aviva, which is now, I get this mixed
part of
up.
Schneider, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Schneider has now purchased Aviva. So now OSI Soft is under the Schneider banner. Do you think that changes the landscape very much, either on people opting as to which historian they want to use, or maybe the direction you see process historians moving in the next handful of years?
Yes. Yeah, it changes the landscape pretty dramatically. How? I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Right. There's look, there's some customers that are excited because now they have another portfolio of products that, if not today, we'll certainly be able to integrate in with their PI system data, right? That's what they're working toward. And they've got there are various levels where they can do that or not do that, So there's some customers that are excited about that opportunity. The traditional Wonderware customers, some that were using some of their pattern recognition software, now it's like kind of one-stop shop for my SCADA, my pattern recognition, and my historian. There's some people excited about that. And there's some other ones that are like, I just really don't like the way things are going. As if anyone had bought OSI Soft, if Siemens had bought them, Emerson, Rockwell, any of them had bought them, there's always going to be those people, probably me included a little bit, because I saw OSI Soft really at its peak. Mm-hmm. You don't want that to change because that culture was super unique. That was a very customer focused culture at that company. And it changed not long after I got there because Pat was getting older. God rest his soul. He passed away, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. But he didn't really have a successor that was going to work. He had tried a couple of different things, they didn't work out. So you knew at some point he was probably going to have to sell it. Mm-hmm. That was the part we were all kind of dreading.
Yep.
And I think it has changed enough to where it's there's going to be some people that leave. There's enough stuff going now. I think we'll talk about this later because I know you're going to ask me about predictions. I think there's going to be some major changes in this market. So
I would agree with that, and I would agree with the statement. I think it was a very good statement of regardless of who bought it, things would change and people would no longer maybe feel exactly the same way, right? I'm sure it is better for some groups and some organizations.
For
And I
sure.
feel that everyone who really appreciated the fact that Pi was, I don't know, as quote unquote independent as any organization as large as they are, who has, agreements with most major vendors. I
They
think
were very
that
agnostic. Yep.
absolutely. And so I think that it will be interesting to see what happens as we move forward. And OSI Soft and Canary Labs, I think they both started kind of mid 80s around the same point in time. And so it's been interesting to watch the different trajectories of those two organizations grow. And it will be interesting as they continue onto assumably different trajectories and assumably working with different customers and use cases. But I kind of want to go slightly move the conversations again towards those customers and use cases, right? So the goal of what we're talking about is standardization in automation. And Jim, you know that we've talked a lot about the hardware side. We've talked about screens. I want to get your take on the standardization from the data level. And if you want to talk about that, or if you want to talk about maybe what are the normal initial conversations you have with new customers of them saying, hey, Jim, we know we need to do a better job with our data, but where do we start?
Ooh, let's talk a little bit about standardization first. Because, as I was kind of talking about with the idea of this asset framework idea, right, is it started to let us build, a hierarchical data model, for, say, an individual plant. And the things that you learn or that you could do with that is if you have common equipment, you're an International Paper or Georgia Pacific, right? You're a paper company. Well, you have a lot of common equipment across a bunch of your plants, right? So you have the ability to start templatizing how you were going to look at certain equipment, certain processes, things of that nature, right? And that really kind of helped because then it didn't really matter if I'm hooking up to a 35-year-old ProBox system, or a brand new Yokogawa DCS that I just got commissioned last week. I can kind of standardize how that looks to someone and how I present that data to someone by using this, hierarchical model and building standard calculations and building standard events and things of that nature. And that's really where, I felt like that was super powerful. And that's really kind of why I got into doing what I do now. Is I think a lot of customers were struggling to see that as a potential use case, right? As, and I remember I was at a chemical site and they said, well, we have 8 distillation columns. You mean I can build a template, and they're all kind of unique, but I could build a template that has kind of the same KPIs and still, kind of keep make everything unique, like eventually you kind of have like a base template. Here's all the stuff that I have on every distillation column, and then have 8 individual templates for the 8 different use cases that I have, but it still allows me to present the data the same way, to people, the same kind of KPIs to people. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying you can do. And they're like, oh, wow. They still didn't fully get it. And they still didn't fully like understand what that really meant to them. And we've probably helped that company. They've been probably they've been our biggest customer year over year. We've saved them millions. I guarantee you we have. And, some of it was just being able to do data modeling, doing calculations, doing events, and presenting the data in such a way that people could actually take action on it. So then the thing that you have to be able to do, though, is say, okay, well, I did this at this one facility. Can I take these same techniques and apply them elsewhere? Right. And that's when you kind of have to step back and think about, okay, well, what if I don't have exactly the same equipment? What if they're, different? Like, what are those main KPIs? How can I do this in such a way that I have some kind of a standard where we can all kind of get on the same page, but yet still maintain the uniqueness for that particular plant. They may want to know more about that equipment and what's going on with it. And so that's usually the challenge now, is how can I give the plant or the mill what they want, but give the corporate people what they want too at the same time. Right. Because at least, like with Pi, with Flow, trying to think of anybody else who's really doing. I haven't gotten into the data part, like what they're doing, and I know they have an asset model too. Canary, is another one. Where you can build an asset model and kind of standardize like how equipment looks, to everybody. That's like really important. And I think that's still something that's not used enough. We still run into a lot of customers that are like, we don't know how to spell AF. What are you talking about?
Jim, coming from the control side, I'm sure that you run into a lot of challenges when it comes to, I guess, the PLC code or the software into which you're tying in not being standard. And as I understand, you can obviously manipulate and massage the data once it gets to your layer and obviously put them in the right buckets. Do you still encounter a lot of challenges where you have to, almost manually go into those programs and sort of understand and decipher what was programmed in by whomever, put that equipment in, right? And it could even be the replica of the same machine built by a slightly different company that programmed it just differently enough for you to have to do that.
Not particularly.
Okay.
I've only looked at a couple of times. Have I ever looked at PLC code or DCS configuration with anyone or by myself? There have been a few cases where like we were trying to build out, like, say, a batch event frame, and we would just have some status flags, or it would be, we would just see like, here's the step number, and it would be like 10, 12, 14. You're like, what does this mean? Right. And someone would have to go in and understand that. And then I would say, okay, well, 13 almost never happens, but what does it mean? Because I've seen it happen in like 5 batches in the last year. And they're like, I don't know. Let me go look at that. Right. I mean, that's the only real time we've had to look at it. The biggest problem we typically have, and this is why, and I'm glad Dave talked me into this when he was helping me out with marketing, was doing these data fidelity studies, like getting the data quality right. I'm working with a customer now. It's funny. I thought a 320,000 tag system was a big one, but I'm actually working on one that's 950,000 tags right now. And, the data quality, and the problem was they're not throwing much data away. So you imagine how many gigs of data they're storing every day. And it's like, oh, I want to pull up a trend of this for a year, and they're grabbing it every second and hardly throwing any of it away, and you just start doing the math, like, okay, what is that, 86,400 points a day times 365 days. I want to pull that up on a trend. And oh, by the way, I've got 15 other values at the same time that I want to pull up that kind of data with. Yeah, I mean, go get another cup of coffee, go talk to somebody else in another cube for 30 minutes and then come back and maybe it'll be ready. That's one thing we've been trying to help people with. And sometimes, what we run into is, oh, that's like an older DCS. We can only get data out of that like every 20, 30, 40 seconds. Otherwise we like tax the communications of it to even be able to run the process that it's running. Right. That's still a challenge, believe it or not. Not as big of one. I mean, people are continuing to modernize, but yeah, data quality is a bigger problem. But typically we don't ever have to get down in the code. We can usually see what's going on.
How do you define, I guess, a little bit better, like data quality, to help everyone understand, like, what does that mean when you have, again, conversations, I want to say, with maybe super technical, managers at these facilities? What does it mean?
So I know some people are, I've been watching some of the comments, and I know some people are driving. But I'm going to like talk with my hands a little bit, which I can't. Dave knows me. I have to talk with my hands. But the problem is when, especially like a lot of times on a DCS or a PLC system, you have a trending, some kind of way to trend a value, right? And you see it doing this, right? But then you go look in your data historian and it's a straight line, right? That's a problem because that's not really reflective of the process, right? That used to be the typical problem. Is the IT guy would come yell at you and say, you're hogging up too much network bandwidth, you're hogging up too much hard drive space, you can't store that much data, right? Well, now that's not really a problem. So everybody's like, well, turn all the compression algorithms off and give me everything. And they don't know what that means either. And that can be almost as bad, so now you know, and I always talk about this like in terms of, say, a temperature transducer, right? And I was just, one of the things I presented to this 950,000 tag site, and it was their corporate site, was, okay, you have a, you know, one of your common instrument types is a K-type thermocouple. Okay, the accuracy of that is 2.2 degrees Celsius, or, and I can't remember what the percentage of the range it was, or, you know, which is like around right at 4 degrees. I think it was 3.96 degrees. So if you have a K-type thermocouple that you want to store all the data from, and it moves 0.2 of a degree, you know, a lot, you know, kind of moves around that, you know, for hours on end, is that real data? Maybe not. You know, now, as I told them, I tend to tell people to store, if you're going to err on collecting a little too much data, you can always filter it down, you know, but don't store everything, you know, and too many people think that that's still a good thing to do. I mean, you talk to the cloud providers, they're like, oh, no, please store everything. No, you really don't want to do that. And, you know, each historian package kind of handles things a little bit different, right? Like I think about, like, the guy, I guarantee the guys at Data Park, if they were listening to this, they're kind of like rolling their eyes at me right now, because they actually will store it all. They actually have a server in their network or in kind of in their deployment that is keeping all the raw data. But if you pull up a year for a trend, you may be getting hourly averages for that. And then as you zoom in, maybe it's 1 minute average, maybe then it's a 30-second average, you know, and then you get down to the actual raw data. They're like, don't throw any of it away, right? That's a way to handle it. You know, the Pi system chose to do lossy compression. I can't remember what Canary does. They have a time value quality, and they do some interesting things kind of with that, so that you're not necessarily storing all the data all the time. But, you know, it is something you have to handle, you know. But to me, what you want is the right amount of data that represents the process signal for every signal you have in your historian system, right? If you only need 50 points to, you know, reproduce this trend, don't store 5,000. There's just no need to do it. If you really want to store 500, okay. You know, but if 50 is not enough for you and you're like, I feel like I lose a little bit, okay, fine. You know, store 500 of them, but don't store all 5,000 of them that you need, or that came in raw, right? So that's something that we kind of work with customers on, because the problem you have is one of two things, right? Is you're building out calculations, you're doing investigative work and doing, you know, big data polls, or you're, you know, building Power BI dashboards or something like that, and you need a lot of data. It can really put a drag on the system if you're never compressing anything out, or if you're just keeping everything that you accumulate. On the flip side is, if you're filtering too much of it out, you miss these little disturbances in your process that may be really important to you. And I've seen that happen too. I've seen people filter out things, you know. I mean, Dave's seen me, you know, present this when there was a steam flow at a chemical plant, and on the screen, there's like 586 values, I think, that came in raw, and they'd only archived 2 of them. And I always ask somebody, I said, if I totalize this steam flow for these 2 hours based on the archive data, do I get the right answer? Not even. Because it was like way up here, and you're running like way down here for most of the time. And, you know, they're like, oh, Jim, it's only 29 to 32 on the screen. I'm like, yeah, but that's 1,000 pounds an hour. So if I miss, you know, if I totalize the wrong number, I tell you using 32,000 pounds an hour, and really you're only using about 31, you know, 30. And we add that up over the course of a year, I've really lied to you, right? And so, you know, getting that right balance is pretty key. So, and that's a hard thing to standardize, because
I've got a couple of questions on a few of those points, Jim, but I guess to bring this back a little bit as to, you know, like why we're trying to do all of this work, and you've just given us a good example. But ultimately, I think that the picture painted online sometimes is that you want to get your OE metrics, and that's going to solve many of your problems, right? But the reality is you need a lot of this more, I don't want to say like profound, but more detailed data that allows you to see deficiencies, right? Like, could you maybe give us like a couple of examples? I know you've given one on the last statement, but what can you find or what can you achieve that is, again, in no way possible by just knowing the OE?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of discussions recently on LinkedIn. I can't believe the amount of noise that people are still making about OEE. I mean, yeah, it's a metric you really want, right? The problem is, okay, if my OEE is 50, 0.50 or 50%, however you want to, look at it, okay, why? Right? Is it excessive downtime? Is it because I don't know how to schedule my equipment? Is it because I have crappy equipment that won't run? Is it that I don't have enough people to run the equipment? Is it that I have crappy supply chain and they're providing me garbage that I can't run reliably? Is it that I make poor quality because I have a crappy supply chain? Just because it says 0.5 doesn't tell you anything, right? You need the components. Then you need to be able to drill down, like we've got a little project we've been doing inside the PI system. We could do it other ways, but for this customer, PI system works. But we're just tracking downtime, right? And literally for them to start, is it scheduled? Is it unscheduled? And I can't remember. There's like three main buckets that they wanted in, right? And then maybe like 2 or 3 buckets under that, right? Because they just want a big picture. Because in most cases, for them, it's unscheduled. It's that they're not scheduling themselves right. They have all this equipment out there and they're not running it right. They're not scheduling it correctly. That's what everybody feels like, and they just have no way to prove it until you start to really measure it. And so, I mean, yeah, OEE is a part of it, but then you have to drill down into the whys. And then you get into continuous process equipment. Sometimes measuring OEE is like kind of tricky, or a batch process. I mean, it gets kind of tricky, depending, on lots of things, upstream processes, downstream processes, they may be your problem. It's like, okay, I'm picking on, R46 here, reactor number 46, but the problem is it's really downstream of that can't keep running to allow R46 to do its job. So there's so much to that. And what's funny, I say I've been doing industrial insight for 6.5 years, going on 7. We've only touched OEE a few times. There's so many other like key metrics that we mess with. Like a big one we've been talking to people about, recently is like real-time chemical usage, real-time energy usage, right? That's not even measured in OEE. Like I can have an OEE of, world-class one is still what, in the 8s?
85, maybe?
Yeah,
85.
Somewhere in that neighborhood. And if I'm using way too much chemical or way too much like raw materials or way too much energy to get there, that may not be cost effective for me. So it doesn't tell you the whole picture at all. And, a lot of things, like, matter of fact, one of the reasons I was kind of running a little bit late to this was that we were working on, Nick was working on this wildly important goals thing for one of our customers, right? And it's 14 metrics across their plant. And 8 of them were chemical usage and 6 of them had to do with energy. And, we were trying to figure out like ways to present that to him in a standard way. But like one of the things that we have to also think about, and one of the things he hadn't quite fully thought through it, is I said, well, we have to find a way to present this in a standard way because we have to do this at other plants like this. And those 14 metrics may be different, but we have to have a standard approach, right? And we have to have a standard like display on how we're going to present it to them, right? That we can take this to another site and we just plug in their metrics, right? Now the underlying metrics, like there were some cases like he was showing me, you know, the metric would be literally the pi tag, right? That would be the today metric.
Mm-hmm.
Then there were other ones that, you know, and the way they had measured it before was in a spreadsheet. It was, you know, you'd get a printer page and you'd fill up a page with all the calculations linked in all the different, you know, sheets of that spreadsheet, right? So it could literally be, you know, very, very complex, or it could be very, very simple. But the thing is if you can get it to where it's say, okay, this is my calculated value, my month to date value, year to date value, last year's value, 2 years ago value, right? Then I can display it the same way every single time, no matter what the metrics is, right? So those things you have to kind of work on from a standard, because I know we're talking standardization.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the challenge. Like when we go to the next site, they may have 20 metrics or 10 metrics that are completely different, calculated totally different, but we're going to be able to take the same approach on how we present it and how they take action on it. So it has nothing to do with OE.
That's a key.
None of it.
And I would say like that's a very important step, right? Because I think you've mentioned that you were standardizing across like 8 stacks and you were able to make templates for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that ultimately all of this and what you've just described across multiple sites boils down to being able to compare apples to apples,
Yes.
right? If you have 5 facilities or 5 stacks, or, you know, obviously there's a different level of who's going to be responsible for that. But if the director of operations sees different facilities with different metrics that report in very non-standardized ways, it becomes really, really difficult to make any business decisions. And so
Yeah.
it's a very important step in this entire process.
And that's what's funny. I remember my good friend Rick Smith. And I can say this because he's talked about this in presentations. He worked for International Paper and has for 40 years now. I think he celebrated 40 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a dying breed, and he's just an amazing guy. I mean, just he's amazing at what he does, but he's also just a really good dude too. But he would talk like they're doing the digester calculation for K-Mir digesters, which is a continuous digester where they're taking the wood chips and using cooking liquors and cooking it down into pulp, right, where they can start to make paper out of it. And he said one of the issues they had is he gets, say, they're 10 subject matter experts on K-Mir digesters from across the company, put them all in a room and say, okay, what's the digester calculation? You know, how do I standard measure how effective a digester is doing its job? And you get 12 different answers, you know, because 2 people had, well, you could do it this way or that way. That's sometimes the big challenge is like, well, what is the standard? And no one can agree. At some point, though, I think this comes to a saying that I used to see. At some point, you have to shoot the engineer and just start production, right? You know, you just have to say, all right, whether all of you agree, this is the way we're going to measure it. And this is how we're going to do it. Okay? Like, I know you guys can argue, like, why my way is better, but this is what we're going to do. and so it does. I got Dave tickled. So, but that's a lot of times what you have to do is say, you know what? Yeah, we don't all agree, but we have to have something that we agree upon enough that it tells us what we need to know and measure everyone the same way. And it's hard. I mean, that's the hard part sometimes.
I love this. I would say that I laughed almost through the entirety of Jim's statement, and I'm not sure we've ever offended Vlad more than saying sometimes we just have to shoot the engineer. But
hey, here's the thing. I resemble that remark because remember, I was a controls engineer, and I'm like, no, it's not ready yet. I still have a little, 10 more rungs to put in here. You know, it's going to be great. And they're finally like, Jim, we got to run, dude. Like, we have to run this machine. Get out of the way. You know, we're turning the button. You know, we're turning the switch on, and we're going.
We're turning it on, and if it runs, it works, and that's how it is. So
and it better work. You know, you're like, we're knocking you out of the way.
So we have some people to thank, and then we're gonna come back to this conversation. But we want to thank the folks at Siemens for sponsoring the entirety of the standardization in automation theme. Sustainability, product customization, digitalization, and new techniques and competitors, manufacturing continues to grow more complex. Standardization is our answer to these challenges. The more standard technology, systems, processes, and interfaces become, the faster and more cost-effectively you can drive your automation and digitalization forward. How can you boost your flexibility and competitiveness? What probably happens when you change the machine supplier and then have to integrate automation systems from different vendors? Without standardization, you need more employees with different skills. You lose flexibility and time on the integration process and have to expect longer downtimes. With standardization, you avoid these problems and gain both flexibility and competitive advantages. Want to learn more? Please check out Siemens.com, a whole bunch of slashes and standardization. We'll go ahead and post that link in all of the comments. If you guys are listening in podcast form, you guys can also go ahead and check that via the show notes. And again, we want to thank Siemens for sponsoring the entirety of this theme, your continued support, and all of the Siemens folks currently in the comments for this. Thank you guys for being here. I do want to say we've had a super active chat so far today. If you guys are new here, it's our goal to always have an active chat. If you guys have questions, please feel free to go ahead and drop some questions in the chat. We will go ahead and put Jim on the spot. If you guys
I would be severely disappointed if you don't ask me any questions and don't put me on the spot. That's kind of the fun part.
I was going to say, Jim, we've got like a couple of dozen comments already. Just no apparently difficult questions for you. But I want to. Not yet, but that's why I do want to let everyone know. Please feel free to go ahead and drop.
I know Vlad asks tough questions. He asks a lot of great questions, and the thing I always feel bad about is Vlad probably has 10 more questions that we never get to on these. I feel bad
on each topic,
on each topic. Yeah, he's like loaded.
Vlad didn't even get to argue with you about how you need to collect more data. And Jim, how dare you only collect once a second data? I need once a millisecond data in order to be able to go figure those things out.
There are times you need that.
That may be a whole other episode when we bring Jim on for the fourth time, and Vlad can go argue that until he is blue in the face.
Well, it depends. I mean, there are absolutely those times. Like you're trying to figure out why your mill stand in your steel mill isn't reacting right, or your drive on your paper machine. 100% you're right. A lot of the stuff that we are looking for don't change that quickly.
Yep.
So
absolutely. I want to go back to the conversation that we were having. I had like a really awesome question, and then you said that sometimes you just have to shoot the engineer and run. But I kind of want to ask the question slightly differently. So let's go back up for just a moment. I guess we were talking about OEE. We were talking about a bunch of other metrics. For someone who does a fair amount of work in and amongst OEE almost every year for longer than Jim has known me, one of the things that frustrates me is the lack of standardization just within the quote-unquote OEE metric. And I think that you brought that up really well, Jim, right? And the pain point to me is less the, hey, each of the Fortune 500 have a slightly different way they calculate OEE, but if you move from one plant to the other,
it's all the same.
80%.
This is how they do it.
Yep, and so for me, that's okay. It's for me, that's one of the parts that makes OEE a less than perfect calculation, is because there's some amount of artistry in it, right? We know what the information is, but everyone comes to the information slightly differently, as you talked about on the digester calculation.
As you said, it's certainly a starting point, right? It gives you an idea. Am I making good quality? Am I running at rate? And am I running? Right? It gives you that, but it always leaves you wanting more. You always have to drill down more, right? That's the one kind of inherent weakness of rolling everything up into one number. So it just leaves you like, okay, what do I need to go attack? And that's why you have to drill down into the components of it.
I would certainly agree with that. I guess for as many organizations that have in theory standardized that or standardized other important metrics, there are probably 10 times as many organizations that each facility runs slightly differently, and it's difficult to take the same metric and go compare it from one facility to the next. Sometimes I've seen from one line to the next. I guess as I look at that as an opportunity when we talk about standardization in automation, I look at kind of the standardizing how we go do these calculations as a good opportunity. Have you been, I guess, on the customers that you work with, Jim, do you see, from mill to mill or plant to plant, they have slightly different ways they calculate this, and that's an opportunity to standardize within the organization? Or are you seeing that most of the time the organizations you work with have fairly standard kind of corporate data structures and corporate data? This is how we're going to go do calculations.
I mean, it highly varies. We don't get a lot into OEE. We're kind of on the periphery of it because they're asking us to do all the stuff that's not OEE, typically. Because there's more to the story. And a lot of times they buy just a packaged software that, you feed in the downtime, you feed in your quality metrics, and you feed in whatever you need, and it kind of spits all that out. It's usually ancillary to us. But, what we've seen is, everybody's does things slightly different. Like I think about, the large chemical plant that we call on. My suspicion is the way they do it there is different than they do it at some other places. But they have a unique facility. That's the only place that's like that. That they make that set of product. So it's not like you have to compare something, the same way. But like if you're a big, paper company, or if you're a, food manufacturer that makes a lot of the same components or same, types of things, what I've seen is generally they kind of agree, whether it's the standard OEE calculation that you can look up online or not, or whether they've tweaked it a little bit. Typically, they're pretty standard. There's some other things that they kind of monkey with. And we all know the nature of people, right? Is they're going to monkey with the metrics to benefit themselves. Like if they're paid off OEE, they're going to find a way to run close to 8.85. Mm-hmm. They're going to find ways to do it. Whether it's accurate or not, that's another question. But that's sometimes when you break something down to it. And I saw someone comment on this or talk about this on LinkedIn just today. And I was kind of thinking the same thing. I was like, yeah, I mean, I remember even working for other companies and they measure you on billable hours or something. Well, you're going to figure out ways to monkey with that metric to make sure that it's to your advantage as the engineer.
Absolutely.
Right. So, that's the thing you have to worry about if you're in management is, are these numbers that I'm seeing a true number? Or are they afraid to bring me the true number? Has someone monkeyed with the metrics for their own benefit? If you're savvy, you should be able to figure it out because something shouldn't be right elsewhere. This plant's running at a 0.85, but why do they never make any money? Mm-hmm. So, there'll be some things that come out. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. No, I would agree. I think metrics are only as good as kind of the honesty that we have within the facility. And if we go and to your point, pay people to seem like the OEE is potentially better than it is, then maybe we've got a bunch of quality post-line issues, and that's why we don't ever make money, but none of the quality gets pulled off during it, and almost no one goes back and puts rework that is discovered at the back of the line into the negative OEE numbers of quality, and that's why it always looks very good.
I'll give you a funny one to that point. Is I was working at Unilever back in 2013, helping them start up a Klondike ice cream bar line. And I don't remember why, but it was like, we need to try to run all 4 lanes on this machine or on this line today and see if we can actually do it. Let's see if we can keep everything running. We did. We got through, I literally did the Newt Rockney speech with everybody. Like, I'm the controls engineer who's a contractor, and I'm like doing the Newt Rockney speech at like 6 a.m., kind of cheering everybody on, like, we're going to do it. You just tell us what you need. And, but we did it and we were pretty proud of it. And then the next day we're doing the same thing, about 2:00, plant manager comes out to me, Larry, he's just like yelling at me. Like, what? And he said, do you know how much waste you guys created yesterday? No. And so he tells me, and he's just like giving me the riot act. And this guy he was a piece of work. I loved him. I loved working with him, but he could be difficult. And this was one of those moments where he was being difficult, right? But I don't blame him, because he's just looking at the numbers like, holy crap, like you just wasted a bunch of stuff. And I could have sworn he was the one that told me, like, we need to run all 4 lanes, and see if we can do this. I'm like,
Yep.
What do you want me to do? Right. So I did it. You didn't say make good product. You just said make product. And I actually, in all fairness, I thought we did. I didn't realize we had wasted that much. But the thing I'll never forget, I told him, I put it right back on him. And I said, okay, Larry, it's 2:00, an hour till shift change.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? You're going to yell at me again tomorrow because we haven't changed our behavior today.
Mm-hmm.
You mean to tell me you can't tell me what the waste numbers are until 2:00 the next afternoon? Mm-hmm. Your data system's broken. You need to be able to tell me like when I come in, and then I can change something. And, I was talking to a guy Monday, and they can't even do OEE because they're still running AS400. They can't even do OEE till 6 weeks, or 2 weeks after month close. They can't do OEE for July until maybe mid-August.
That's
Why?
wild.
Because they're because of all the closing out and it's all in some AS400, and it's just they're so backwards. I asked the same question, and it's just like, yeah, that's not a good situation. I mean, you should be able to have that at near real time.
Mm-hmm.
In near real time. So, I mean, quality a lot of times is an after the fact, depending on what it is you're making.
Yep.
It can be an after the fact kind of thing. Especially if the process you're measuring is like an intermediate or a, kind of first line, process, right? Because what you don't know is, am I producing something that downstream is not of good quality, and really I'm the cause of that? So there is some delay, right? But it should be relatively near real time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's not where every company lives, as I found out. I was stunned at what I heard. I couldn't believe it.
I don't know. I can't wrap my head around what needs to happen in 6 weeks for them to get that OE.
Well, it's like 2 weeks after the end of the month, right?
Yeah, so
I calculate it on a monthly basis, but it takes them that long because they have some old mainframe and they're still punching a bunch of crap in. It takes them 2 weeks to close. 2 weeks to close the month, and then they can say, "Well, here's all the numbers."
Or it has to do something with the financial system, and maybe the financial system is also tied in there, and that's why they've got month close, and maybe month close just takes them 2 weeks, which is an awfully long time for month close before they can actually say these are the numbers we did, and potentially extrapolate OEE out of those numbers. But no, I agree. At that point, we've certainly missed real time by, I don't know, at least 6 weeks. We've certainly missed real time by about 6 weeks.
Yep.
What do you think, Vlad? What questions do we still need to ask Jim about standardization in automation on the data side?
Maybe less so on the standardization, but going back to the point of, collecting data and almost the next step, which is then analyzing, processing, and so sort of drawing conclusions on that data.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you, Jim, in terms of expertise or how you generally deal with customers, because I've seen both sides of the story. And what I mean by that is, in one instance, the contractor consultant comes in, sort of pulls the data out, and then it's given to the end user, here's a data lake, whatever, there's many acronyms nowadays in the industrial space, data swamp, data lake, unified namespace, whatever that may be. And here you go, end user, now you're left to kind of draw conclusions from this, versus having a team with expertise and an understanding of data and process that can then decipher, analyze, and, as you've said, also to make decisions on, are we having enough, let's say, accuracy? Well, let's go adjust this, and then next week we have enough data to make a decision. How does that maybe dynamic play out in your conversations? And also, I guess, from the end user standpoint, what do you think the ideal version of that is? Should they be given all the reins to make all the decisions themselves? Should they involve a separate team? What does that generally look like?
Well, I can tell you kind of how we go about things, because I think we're relatively unique. in kind of how we approach, customers, right? It's all their data. We take all their data and we craft it in such a way and present it to them to where it tells them a story. I mean, I learned that through Cole Nussbaum or Knaflich's, storytelling with data, because I was very guilty of coming from an engineering background. I just threw everything on the screen. Here's everything you're ever going to want to know. And then they have no idea, well, what is it you're trying to actually tell me, right? So what we really try to do is think about, all right, what is it you're trying to understand about your process, about your equipment, about your plant? And how can we roll up all this raw data into some kind of information that you can take action on, right? I know this reactor is struggling with cycle time, and it's because of this, right? We've got to present a solution in such a way that they can see that. And sometimes that's just in, if we're working in the Pi system, it's just in Pi Vision. It's a real-time updating graphic with some metrics on it. Sometimes the real story is you need to take a year or two's worth of data and slice and dice it in Power BI or Tableau to find out what are some of the root causes of it, right? What we try to do is I always tell my people, try to look at everything like you're the end user, like you're the audience, right? If you're talking to an engineer over a particular process and they're responsible for making that process run as efficiently as possible, well, understand, what does that mean to them? What do they need to look at? How can you present that to them in such a way that they can do that? If it's a plant manager or a director or something like that, they don't want all that detail that the engineer wanted, right? They need some more high level kind of KPIs that show them, here's where things are going and here's where maybe we're struggling. And, I tell, like a plant manager, like I walked into a paper company facility and I sat through their morning meetings, the plant wide one and each individual areas meetings, right? Just to see what they talked about. It was about what I expected in a lot of ways, and in some ways it wasn't. But in every case, you had a super detailed pie graphic of a lot of stuff, and everybody in the room's picking out their little individual numbers and KPIs. Yeah, what about this? Well, what about that? What about that? And I'm sitting here like, well, if you guys are all kind of looking at some of the same things, like, why are you looking at this page that's got 500 numbers on it? There's probably 20 that you care about. Mm-hmm. And then you're drilling to another page that probably has a few, and then another page that has a few. Well, let's put them all on one and how they relate to each other and turn them red if they're bad. So then you're like, okay, pulp mill's having a problem. Click. And then you drill into the details of the pulp mill. This is red. Okay, what's going on there? Right? And instead, they spend too much time like trying to process everything. And so kind of how we, I always teach my people and talk to my people about is, if you're that plant manager, you're the mill manager, how do I need to see this information in such a way that I don't have to hunt and pick it all out of 50 screens, right? What is it that you need? And sometimes you just have to ask the question, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Like I asked the mill manager, I said, what is it that keeps you up at night? Which is the standard consultant question, right? It's probably a stupid question in all honesty. But he said, well, not necessarily what keeps me up at night, but like what I look at in the morning is our mill in balance? Now they're a single line mill, like, chips come in, to the digester, go all the way through the fiber line, the paper machine. It's all one line, right? Where a lot of mills have 2 or 3 digesters, 2 or 3 paper machines. Like there's a bunch of ways through the plant or through the mill. Well, this is a single line. And so you said, I want to know is the pulp mill outrunning the paper machine? Is our liquor cycle not keeping up with the digester? Those are the kind of things I really worry about. And that's what I'm trying to gain an assessment of. When I get up in the morning or before I even get to the mill, I'm trying to, get that information. Well, I'm like, well, how do you do it now? Well, I go to this page and I look at this, and I go to that page and look at that, and then I go over here, and then I go over here. I'm like, you got to go to like 4 or 5 different places and kind of like figure it out in your head. You know, is this in balance with that? Shouldn't it just all be on one page simply? And so what we're building for him is, you know, we're building some analytics and some calculations that kind of tell him if he's in the right spot. But a simple thing he can pull up on his phone, right? Literally the display is going to be super simple that he can pull up on his phone and say, is the mill in balance right now? Mm-hmm. And that's where they start their morning meeting at.
What can they, curiosity on the process side, what can they adjust to rebalance the mill? Is there like an action?
Yeah, I mean, you can slow, like if the digester, you know, is running slower, and then you have to slow the paper machine down, right? Because you're going to run out of pulp, and then you have to shut the machine down, right? So, or, you know, if the liquor cycle is running great, so the recovery cycle is running great, now I don't have anywhere to put all my, you know, the cooking liquors that I've recovered, because I'm outrunning how fast the digester can use it, right? Those are the kind of things that they want to try to avoid. And that happens a lot in, you know, other plants too, you know, food plants. I mean, that's a big deal, right? You know, because you have multiple different processes, right? And if one outruns the other, it's like, well, I don't have anywhere to store all this batter for my waffles that I'm making. Mm. You know, like, or I don't have places to store all this ice cream mix that I'm going to make ice cream bars out of, right? Or, you know, hey, I'm running, you know, 600 counts a minute, you know, on this line, but the ice cream mix isn't keeping up with me. So now I'm having to slow down, right? And so keeping things in balance, and I think building a set of metrics for the customer where they can kind of see that easily, quickly, you know, things are all kind of a grayscale, and except for this one thing that's kind of turned red on the screen. Oh, what's going on with that, right? They should be able to look at a dashboard and in just a few seconds understand where the issues are.
Yeah, I definitely agree, right? I think that the more visibility they have, and the more, as you said, like filtered visibility, right? It's not just raw data thrown at them.
Oh, yeah.
It certainly makes the decision process a lot simpler.
And we as engineers love to throw raw data at people and expect people to interpret it the same way we do. So we're all guilty.
Hey, I think we can appreciate the difficulty it takes to get that data. So sometimes, you know, we're just excited to
present anything, right? Here's a trend, you know, and you're like, what is this? I'm like, I don't want.
I think that was a really good point, right? I think to Vlad's point, I think sometimes it can certainly be difficult to get data, but to Jim's point, understanding the target customer, be it the mill manager, be it someone else, and understanding what their pain points are, if you can quickly allow them to see, hey, we're running well or we're running poorly, then that alleviates so much stress from them. They almost exclusively don't care the amount of time and effort it took to get, you know, that single screen. But lots of times that alleviates their pain points. They can see the contextual value of data, and then seeing the contextual value of data allows you to hopefully go do that for a bunch of different departments. But that is certainly more difficult and much more bespoke than it is just going and collecting raw digester data and saying this is how the digester data is running versus the 12 seasons versus the temperature versus all of the other information that you pull in at any different facility. So I think that is a very good point.
Well, I'll tell you another story out of the paper industry. You know, I heard one of the business unit managers literally sleeps with his cell phone right here so that he doesn't miss a text from the mill. If he gets up in the middle of the night, he goes in his office where he has 2 pie screens pulled up at all times showing him how his area is running. And he sleeps the rest of the night on the couch, kind of with one eye open. That's no way to live, right?
It's no way to live.
And, you know, it's like, so why is that happening, right? Well, you think in the old days, well, you couldn't always see exactly what was going on and where problems may be around the corner, right? There's no excuse for that today. We have all of that. They have all the data, right? It's all there. It's just not into information. where people below him can look at it and say, oh, we have this upset condition. Oh, here's what we should do, without having to call or text him. Right. And that's the thing we're really, I don't know, that trip and a couple of people I've talked to since then is we really have to change up like how we present things to operators and operations management so that they can make good decisions, because we have a lot less experience out there running our equipment and our processes today than what we've been used to. So they don't always know, they haven't always seen all the different upset conditions that may happen, and they may not always make the right decision. And then they crash everything, and then that crashes the whole mill, because they make the wrong call. And so that's why the guy sleeps like this, right? Is so if he doesn't want someone crashing the whole mill, so hey, text or call me. Don't care what the hour is. I think this is something like kind of we're taking this challenge on, is how do we better present the information to those who are working at the plant at all times, not just to the mill manager, mill balance, right? But it's like Abel's working on a thing for that plant where understanding like when one thing's outrunning the other and stuff like that, what should I do? Right? Without having to call the mill manager or the business unit manager, the operator can see, oh, I'm outrunning these guys. Oh, I probably ought to slow back a little, and oh, they sped up. Okay, I can speed back up, and they understand. They have little notes on the screen that say, hey, you can raise your rate. You want to get to this goal rate. This is where we want to be. And everybody's on the same page.
Yep.
Like, we want to be here. And it can foster some communication instead of this.
Absolutely. Right? And so, in my experience, I think that's very important. And it will only get more important because we have lost much of our, very experienced second and third shift operators, because very few people want to go run, especially third shift, their entire life. And so you no longer have people with, 5 or 10 or 30 years of experience.
Yep.
And so it's the middle of the night when we always have these problems. And most of the places that I work with, anytime we've got a crash or anytime, in theory, everyone blames third shift for getting everything out of whack. First shift has to go spend the first couple of hours of their shift going to reset everything to try to get everything up and running. It's generally running well by the time they hand over the second shift. And many times they come in on first shift and it's those same issues. And
this is why they often rotate shifts, right? They work 12 hours, they work 4 on, 3 off, 3 on, 4 off, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then they flip nights to days, right? So that they can kind of cross-pollinate, which also then makes it hard when you're doing things where you're trying to figure out by which shift and who did this. Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, Fred was covering for John on that one. And yeah, he kind of crashed it, but, crew C took the blame, right?
Yep.
And so it's
also not a way to live.
No,
it's a difficult way to live.
It is tough. But the thing is if I want us to be able to kind of standardize how we present, certain information, to front-end supervisors and, managers and even operators so that they can make good decisions, right? And how can we take that from a plant to another, one plant in an organization to another plant that's very similar but different? How can we take a standardized approach? Because, like I watched one company that I thought got way too wound up in how they standardized everything. Like, it got so complex that nobody wanted to use the system. Like, I understood what they were getting at and there was some good out of it, but they just took it to the nth degree. Literally we work with another integrator, and it was kind of funny. They're one of the majors. And I was talking to the engineer that wrote the spec, and the original spec was like 10 or 12 pages, and it turned into like 120. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much, but like no one's going to read 120 pages and follow all of that. Right. So you have to have like some kind of guidelines that steer you, that these are things we're not going to compromise. These are the things that really matter to us, and we're going to do the same way every time. And then you can have some creativity after that, and they were really trying to get that right. And there was definitely some good things that came out of it for them as a business. But I think in a lot of ways, it was so complex that a lot of the end users didn't really want to use it. And that's something you have to be really careful of too. Like as engineers, like we don't mind necessarily complexity, especially if we understand it. And then you look at, you give it to somebody and it's like, here, follow this path, right? Just follow that and you'll be good. Right. And for those of you that can't see it, I just like scribbled on my, pad back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's like, yeah, just follow that. It's crystal clear to me. Like I did it all. Right. But to somebody who's never seen it at all, it's like, that's what it looks like to them. And, that's the challenge, right? I got what they were trying to do. I don't know that they executed that the way they wanted to.
Absolutely. And I would like to say, Jim, you might be the ultimate video podcast guest, because not only do you do the thing, but then you describe the thing for the listeners on the podcast side. So from us to you and them to you, thank you very much for that.
Well, it's funny because I watch a lot of podcasts and listen to a lot of podcasts, and the good ones, do that. They'll say, hey, I realize that not everybody's on YouTube or Rumble or whatever or Spotify and watching video. Like you may be driving and just listening to the audio, right? So here's what is up on the screen right now. Like they're showing a video of something, right? And that's like an important thing. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
No, and thank you for that. This has been an amazing conversation. I have prepared you for this next question. You know that I always like to ask people to go ahead and predict the future. So I want to know where you think that the future of either standardization of data or kind of all of this is going to go. What do you think the next handful of years is going to be?
I think the landscape's going to change drastically in the next 10 years. I think one of the things I actually am kind of thinking is going to happen now that, kind of OSIsoft's been bought. I think the market's going to get a little more fragmented. I think there are going to be some people that get fed up. They just don't want to go that way. That Aviva wants to take it, right, wrong, or indifferent. I just think that's going to happen. For all my Aviva folks out there, sorry. Like, I just think that's going to happen. Like, I think you guys know it too, right? And by the same token, there's going to be some that really like standardize on their stuff, right? But it's going to get a lot more fragmented. Watching a company like, Flow, and there's some others that are kind of working in this space that kind of work on that intermediate layer where, hey, I can build my standard data model. I can build a hierarchy. I can build on my calculations. I can build on my events. Now, all of a sudden, all I need is a good time series database to feed that. Right. And they've built some visualizations. We're seeing, our friends over at IOTA, that bunch of Seek and XSeek and XOSIsoft people have come up with like a web-based visualization tool. I see it, where it used to be like I bought Pi and I used the data archive, I used AF, I used PyVision or Process Book, or I may have thrown a different like visualization layer. Like a lot of people went, like especially in the paper industry, went to Parkview because they built a lot of very specific things. I think you're going to see more of that, where the time series data versus the data modeling versus the visualization layer is actually going to fragment. I think it's actually, you may, instead of going with one solution like a Pi system, you may pick and choose different components and can plug and play them, because certainly the time series data can be moved rather easily, migrated from system to system. The calculations, that's going to be a little trickier, but very likely it can be. And then on the visualization side, I think that'll be able to be ported too. So I think it's going to be more of like a modular system and more of a plug and play system than what we've seen. I think that's the way. I think that's the way it's going to go. I would be surprised if it doesn't go that way.
Interesting.
So,
I think that if nothing else, we can probably all agree here that more options are only better for the people trying to use those types of technologies in the field.
yeah, and honestly, that kind of hurts me a little bit too, because I sold Pi, for a couple of years, and that's what we've been working on. Like, it pains me to say what I just said. I don't want anybody like, who've known me kind of freak out, but I just, it pains me to say that, but I just see that happening. I mean, I'm preparing us for that to happen. Just the conversations I'm having with customers, they're already kind of thinking about it. And I don't know that there were viable options. And I think now there's starting to be some viable options of other ways that you can go about some of the things you've been used to doing.
Absolutely. I think that the future will certainly be interesting. And I think more and more people, both in the kind of integration service provider space, as well as in the end user space, are going to continue to want new or at least better and more ways to go ahead and visualize and contextualize that data. And the future will be very much for the people that can help do that, either on the software side or on the service provider side. So I would certainly agree.
And I don't really see like the three hyperscalers really playing a part in any of this either: Google, AWS, Amazon, or Microsoft.
Yep.
I don't think they get it, nor do they have the patience to play in this market. It's going to be specialized people who've come from this industry. I mean, you look at, somebody I haven't mentioned, like somebody like the folks at HighByte, like John came from, and I'm trying to remember there's like three of them that founded it. They all came from Kepware, right? They came from an industrial background, right? The people from IOTA came from OSI Soft and Seek, These people have come from a legacy of working in industry.
Yep.
And I think that's where the people who are going to succeed have that background. And they're just like, I need to, and you look at, the people from Canary, the people from Data Park, they all have that pedigree. They all have that background. That's where the wins are going to come from. And that's, given that we've seen the upset in the market now, there's an upset in the force, that's what I think is going to be the scramble.
I would agree with that. I think that we've probably all seen different solutions and people trying to come into the industry thinking it's going to be very easy to disrupt the industry without the industrial knowledge. I'm not sure I've not seen every single one of them struggle without any sort of industrial background for all of the reasons that you just provided. Thank you, Jim. You know that we like to ask for book recommendations, and you provided us with a bunch of different book recommendations over the year. But you said you've got at least one new book recommendation that you can give us today.
Yeah. So I was joking around with the guys off camera. I'll at least say this. So like I've been down this rabbit hole of biblical giants lately. But I'm not going to recommend, because I know not everybody likes that kind of stuff. I'm going to recommend something more on the business side. But that's the rabbit hole I'm chasing these days, and it's been kind of fun. It's been an interesting journey. Like it's kind of actually surprising. But the one I'm going to recommend is, and this was actually recommended by my financial advisor Marcus Young, and that's from Ray Dalio. It's fairly new. Principles for dealing with the changing world order, why nations succeed and fail. And in that, he's really talking about how nations, he's really gone and done study of the rise and fall of great nations and, their fiat currency or their gold-backed or commodity-backed currencies and how they've kind of evolved, and then how we have the political divisions and, all these kind of things, right? All these things that we see happening, not just in the States, but other places, right? He really kind of talks about that, and the reason why I really kind of read that book, and I have not finished with it. I'm probably about halfway through it. And then I was like, ooh, giants. But what I have learned is there's a repetitive pattern. And there are definitely things changing, and we as like business owners, and even like, you know, I know Vlad was kind of talking about, you know, just personal journey here, right? We have to find ways to protect ourselves, you know, with what potentially could be coming. And that's, I think we all have to have a better understanding of, you know, finances and what's really happening, you know, how the Fed actually works. You know, it's probably not what you think at first. And it's a little shocking, and it helps you kind of prepare your mind for what could be coming.
Mhm.
And so I highly recommend it. I think he did a really good job in his research. Do I agree with everything he says? No, but that's okay. I don't agree with, I don't 100% agree with pretty much anybody. Right. And that's okay. And that's something we've kind of forgotten as a society these days. It's like, oh, you don't 100% agree with me, you must hate me. I'm like, no, I don't hate you. It's just I happen to disagree. I have a different set of experiences in life or a different set of beliefs that don't line up with yours. That doesn't mean I hate you, you know. And I think we've forgotten that. And I think, you know, he talks a little bit about that, you know, in the book, and like that's a problem. You know, that's going to be a problem for our financial system and how we recover.
Absolutely. No, I think very interesting book recommendations there. I look forward to the next time that you come on, Jim. We can go compare these book recommendations to what you are reading in, you know, a couple of months or 100 episodes,
There is
whichever
no
comes
telling.
first.
There's
There
no
is no
telling what I'll be into then, because I've gone down some weird rabbit holes the last 3 years since
Absolutely.
COVID. So
So kind of continuing on that, you know that we love to ask for some career advice, and I guess I know that the Industrial Insight team is growing, and so I know that you certainly, I guess you have probably mentored and worked with a bunch of younger engineers for at
yep.
least as long, if not longer, than I've known you. So, coming from maybe a younger engineer perspective, looking to get in or continue to move up on the data side of the business, what is your best career advice for them?
So not necessarily to work with us, but one thing I think is happening and needs to change is we need craftspeople still. And that doesn't mean, you know, you go work in a trade, like going to be an electrician or, you know, welder or whatever. I'm saying whatever it is you do, we need people who are great and who are experts at that thing. Whether it's you want to be a PLC programmer, really, really good at visual design for HMIs, networking, teaching. Like I think about Tim Wilburn teaching, Josh Varghese, is that his last name? Like he's a networking guru.
Absolutely.
Like those guys know their craft. Like Vlad, you know, because he teaches a lot too. Like he knows his craft. And we don't have enough people who are doing that. They just want to kind of move around and experience everything, and guilty. Like if you look at my career trajectory,
Yep.
6 years, 6 years, 6 years, you know, I've been in Industrial Insight 6 years, but guess what? I'm going to be here longer than that. This is my
Good.
retirement project. But we need people who are craftsmen at things, right? We're losing like experts. Like if I'm looking at International Paper, like just as a for instance, right? And I'm not saying this about them, I'm just saying I'll pick on them, right?
Yep.
Let's say they've got 10 digester experts. They're all 50 plus.
Oh yeah.
Right? Where's the up and coming 25, 30-year-old who's going to fill those shoes and be okay filling those shoes?
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to be really great at understanding how a K-Mir digester works for the rest of my career. Like we're missing craftspeople who really understand and really are experts at what they do. So my advice to people is don't be afraid of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. Are you going to make as much money? Maybe, maybe not. You may be a lot happier.
Mm-hmm.
So don't turn your back on that. And there's just probably even some people on here who, and I've told my boys this: don't be afraid of the trades. We're going to need them. Too many people turn their back on them and say, no, I got to have a 4-year degree. Don't neglect the trades.
So. I think those are really good comments, Jim. I guess the only comment / counterpoint that I would like to make is that, and you and I have had this conversation, is that I think we need, especially end users, to make people feel like they can go spend the next 40 years of their career being the digester expert, as opposed to, yes, exactly. And I think that we absolutely need craftspeople willing to devote, their career or a chunk of their career to the thing that they're doing. But on the counterpoint, we need to go make people want to do that. We need to go make.
We need to reward it.
Yes, absolutely. I would certainly agree with that. And then the last question for you, Jim, is who should reach out? Industrial Insight is your company. Are you guys hiring? Are you looking for new clients? What sort of conversations do you want to have? How can our platform and community help you?
So we're always looking for new clients. We like to diversify our portfolio, right? So we've had a lot of new logos this year, which is great. We've diversified industries. So we've done work in paper, chemicals, oil and gas, power, food. Trying to think, I'm probably missing one, but we're talking to a pharma customer here next week. We've talked to some water wastewater people, but for us, we're always looking for clients, like I said, good ones that really want to go become a data-driven organization and really change up how they're doing things. Mm-hmm. As we expand, yes, we're always looking for people for down the line. And, here's the thing I always tell everybody is like, you don't have to be an expert in what we do already. I hired Philip Babb last year, and he was a petroleum engineer, but he had been working with data some, and had done some little bit of Python code and stuff like that, been doing a bunch of stuff in Excel, trying to visualize things and understand what was going on. And he loved to solve puzzles, right? He had never seen a pi system. He couldn't even spell pi, right? He would have spelled it PIE, right? He wouldn't have known what AF was, right? He's phenomenal. Like, I just released a video today where he figured out how to do a variable speed pump curve, the XY plot for it in an AF and PiVision.
That's awesome.
None of us had figured that out. And he just kept chipping away, and Katie helped him, and I helped him, and Ben helped him, here and there. But he's the one that figured it out. And so, yes, I'm always looking for people like that. But not at the moment. Like, I think we're okay, staffing wise, but I'm always looking for people down the road.
Absolutely. No, Jim, this has been amazing. As I said at the beginning, thank you for coming to join us. You're one of those people that we could certainly talk to every week, but that would almost,
you wouldn't want to do that.
You and I have had conversations every week for multiple years at a time. So that would not be a problem. Our listeners maybe would get tired of the weeds between the three of us, but this has been awesome. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Thank you to Siemens for sponsoring Standardization in Automation. If you guys are watching live, please make sure that you're connected with Jim and Vlad and myself. Please follow Manufacturing Hub on LinkedIn and YouTube and basically everywhere else that you can go and do that. And if you haven't followed Solus PLC on YouTube, please go follow Solus PLC on YouTube. I'm telling Vlad.
Yeah, Vlad does a great job. I will tell you that for a fact.
Absolutely. So Vlad has been notoriously quiet for the last 15 minutes. So please.
He's still mad at me over the shoot the engineer comment.
Yes. For all of our podcast listeners, before I ask you to like and subscribe, please note that there are flames and steam coming off of Vlad's head. Kimmy almost needed to come just douse him with water because the house is now 60 degrees C warmer than it was. But no, if you guys are listening in podcast form, please feel free to go follow along, rate us 5 stars everywhere you can do. I have found that if I ask people to like and subscribe, Jim, people like and subscribe and more people listen to us.
Well, hey, guess what? Industrial Insight has a YouTube channel. Just released a video today. Like and subscribe there too. I'm terrible at asking people to do that, but I watch a lot of YouTube and everybody in the first 3 minutes is like and subscribe if you like this content. I'm like, well, I don't know if I like it yet or not, but all right, I'll give you a like.
Absolutely.
It does help. It does help push it out, right?
Thank you to Jim. Thank you to everyone else. We will see everyone next Wednesday live and next Thursday in your earbuds. Until then, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.